Good afternoon, everybody. I hope I'm audible on the speaker there. First of all, thanking the Indian Institute of Architects Karnataka chapter for having considered me worthy enough to speak on their first inaugural event of this lecture series from the education cell, which is being headed by Ramaraju. Thank KS School of Architecture for having hosted this event and for having allowed their premises to be used for or allowing the IIA chapter to conduct this event at their school. All the staff and students of KSSOA, thank you so much. Thank you, Salim sir, Mohan sir, and the rest of the IIA team for allowing me to be the first speaker on this set of events. Thank you again. Good afternoon once more. I would like to start this by admitting that honestly, when this topic was given, I didn't choose this topic. Ramaraju sent me this topic that you need to be speaking on this subject. I took a week, and then after a week, I sent him a note saying that too heavy for me. I don't think I'll be able to do this. I'll probably do something else. So I suggested another topic to him. Then I sat back and spent a day thinking about this, and then realized for students, there is no other topic which is more interesting than this. Considering the fact that when we were students also, this was something which always occupied your mind in some ways or the other. And this is always a confusing topic in the sense that when you use this heavy word called concept, people normally freeze. People normally stop in their tracks. You don't know what to say next when a juror or somebody in the jury asks this sudden question of what is the concept behind your design? And then for 2 minutes, there is pin drop silence. You rarely know what to say after somebody asks a question like that. So I thought probably it was a great topic to talk on. So I'll ask an excuse from the academic fraternity and the professional fraternity if I'm oversimplifying things in this talk a little bit. But then it is how do you say it is targeted for the student community. So a little bit of oversimplification was necessary. So I'll start this by asking. Does this move? Let's start. 1 minute. I was trying to push that.
One slide. Just click on slide.
Okay. Now it goes there. Thank you. Okay, this is not the matinee show of Three Idiots. The reason why I brought up the slides was it at least helps the students to get a grip on what this topic is all about. At least the student community who is sitting here, 4 or 5 of you. Have all of you seen this movie? All of you have, right? Now, if I were to ask you a simple question, what is this movie about? What are you trying? What is the director trying to tell you through this movie? Anybody? Just give me a vague, whatever answer comes to your mind. It's not an exam question. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, she says studies need not be strict, it could be playful also. Anybody else? I understand. Yeah. So that is not the way to go about it, is what you're saying. Is that what he's trying to say? Yeah. So she says that it is about not mugging and learning, and there is a better way of learning. That is, I guess, what you're trying to say. Anybody else? Anybody want to add?
There's a lot of chats.
Yeah, a lot of
people have replied in the chat.
Okay.
Somebody says all is well.
Good.
Is about understanding subject with passion and not by force.
Very good. Yeah. So
And
there
follow
are
your heart.
exactly. So there are a lot of these things which come across, which the movie is trying to tell you. But somewhere at the back, the main character in the movie, Amir Khan, who's playing Unsuk Wangdu, if I'm not wrong, who states it towards the end of the movie. He says, it is all about having a passion for what you do. And if you're good at what you do, success will follow. And at that point, you see Chatur Ramalingam chasing him with a pen, asking him to sign the contract. So the point that the movie is trying to make here is that one needs to be passionate about what one is doing without worrying, without thinking about the outcome of what you're doing. And the rest will automatically follow. Now that to me would constitute the concept for the movie, the main central idea which drives the movie. But I could say this same idea through so many other mediums. Why did I choose the medium of a movie or of a college setup? Now that when I talk about the rest of the story, we'll move forward. We'll keep this idea at the back. So the point is, it's the central idea which drives something. The idea of a concept is that one needs something to drive the rest of the story or hold the rest of the story together. And that idea, that central idea which holds the rest of the story together, is what one would call the concept. Now, at student level, when somebody says that what is the central idea which holds your design together, we are a little confused. We don't know from where to start. Where does the central idea begin? What is this idea of the so-called central idea? So I'll start the story from taking one thread of thought and trying to take it through, holding only one thread, and you can apply this to a multiple other threads similar to this. So what I've tried to do here is, I'm trying to segregate this idea of concept in 3-4 layers. So I'm taking it with the example of the modernist movement, for example. You could apply this to deconstruction, you could apply it to postmodernism, you can apply it to any ism that happens subsequently to that. But I've chosen this route of taking one particular thing and trying to run this story through one thread of thought. Why I take this is basically because sometimes concepts work at various levels. Now, this is not necessarily a concept, it's a manifesto. Modernism started around the Industrial Revolution, and it slowly picked up steam because there was this huge migration of people to the cities. Urbanization happened, rapid urbanization, a lot of people moving into the cities, a lot of housing required, a lot of industry happening. A new language had to be developed to, to assist this new way of living. And that affected everything. That affected the arts, it affected literature, it affected all the concerned fields. Architecture also was affected, and a group of architects from that period kind of got together to write this so-called urbanist manifesto or the modernist manifesto, which talked about housing in the cities, the condition of housing, how do you house millions of people. It talked about equitable living, to give a good life to everybody who lived in an urban setup. It talked about getting away from things like ornament and things like that, because you wanted a clean break from the past. You wanted a new beginning, a new utopia, if you want to call it that, a new world order, if you want to call it that, which had nothing to do with where you came from. So in some ways, you wanted to wipe the slate clean and start afresh, start totally from a clean slate. Now, why am I saying this is because now that becomes a seed of thought which drives a whole set of architects from there on. So when you say when you say concept at one level, now this is a larger concept or a larger idea, which is driving the body of work of almost a whole generation of architects. Now, people like Corbusier or Wright or Mies or Kahn or all the greats that you hear after that, they all finally belong to this modernist school of thought. So in some ways, modernism becomes the main concept or the main idea under which you have so many people working, or who all, subscribe to this idea. This idea of creating detail or creating ornament through the way you build, through your structure. The idea of being honest to what you're doing. The idea of looking at people's quality of life when you're doing housing, or we're talking about how people will live in the cities. There are certain common thoughts or common ideas which tie all the modernists together, and everybody's worked on that. Corbusier did the Villa Radius when he was doing the master plan for Paris, talking about how people will live in a city like Paris. Wright is doing that in America. Somebody else is doing it in some other country, but all of them are talking the same thing in terms of the quality of life in urban spaces, how will people live henceforth, how will transportation change the whole thing? And these common threads or common ideas tie all these architects in terms of their body of work. So to me, that is the main concept, or that is the big idea, or that is the, like I said in the Three Idiots, the big idea is this. Now from there, let's filter down and see how that idea transfers to the next set of people. Somebody like a Cobb then picks up his central idea. Under the umbrella of the so-called modernist movement, Cobb writes his 5 points of new architecture. He writes about the pilotis, that is the building lifted off from the ground on columns so that the plan in the ground can be free. He talks about a free design of the ground floor plan, free design of the facade, that is the facade is detached from the structure of the building, so you can do anything with it to talk about how the building will shape up. He talks about horizontal windows, he talks about the roof garden. Now, this is, let's say, concept level number 2. Now, when you say concept level number 2, it is basically the ideas that a particular architect subscribes to, which then becomes his body of work for the rest of his life sometimes. Now, if I were to look at the works which Cobb did subsequently, there are 4 or 5 buildings at least which absolutely agree with the idea of these 5 points of architecture. Milonas in Ahmedabad, which talks about the free plan, which talks about the structure being independent of the free plan. It talks about the facade, which is free. It talks about a terrace, which is a green garden. So all the 5 points of architecture covered, but then this is his take on what his architecture should be, under the bigger umbrella of what one would call the modernist movement. So the modernist movement becomes the big central idea, under which now it percolates down to one man's vision for what his work will be for the rest of his life. Now, under this, like I said, whether it's Milonas or whether it's Villa Savoy, which is a classic example of these 5 points of architecture that he talks about. The ground floor plan lifted off on columns, which allows for a free ground floor plan, which allows for a free facade with those ribbon windows, and which allows for a terrace garden, which he calls the 5th elevation of the building. Like the 4 elevations, for him, the terrace was always the 5th elevation. He would always call the terrace his 5th elevation. So the terrace was an extremely important feature, whether it was his apartments that he did in Marseilles and the other ones which became so famous later on. But all of them followed this central idea which he laid out for himself in the beginning, that he would follow. This has come from phenomenal research, phenomenal writing, which he did during the Second World War when he was not building. There was no building activity at that point of time, but you thought so much, you observed so much, and you wrote so much. And because of which, you kind of distilled it for yourself, saying that for me, if I do this, it is enough. And that, I think, would describe what one would call as the concept for his work, entire body of work, not concept for a particular project. So there is a distinction now that I'm trying to make between when you say the concept of a theme or of a manifesto, that kind of ties X number of architects together. Then it boils down to this idea of a manifesto for a particular architect when he writes what he thinks he should be doing with his projects. So whether it is assembly building at Chandigarh, which again talks of these 5 points of architecture. Now from there, I bring it down to an example who we all hold dear, Charles Correa. I mean, one can't talk about Indian architecture without talking about Mr. Correa. And why I bring him up here is basically because most of you would have at least seen some photographs of his works, visited some of his buildings. So at least there is some connect, unlike a Western architect whom you only see in books. Now, through him, I would want to explore this idea of this concept a little more in detail. So we talked about 2 things right now. We talked about the idea of the larger idea, which you call the manifesto which held all the modernists together. Then we talked about a second layer, which talked about an architect and what his concept for his buildings would be. So what Correa talks about? Correa talks about 2 ideas which run through all his projects. And this is again very early in his career, and there are innumerable essays which he's written on it. One is this idea of what he calls the ritualistic pathway. And he's written a number of essays on this. And this idea of the ritualistic pathway comes from his understanding of the temple towns in southern India and also northern India, where he traveled extensively. This whole idea of how people move through space. And when you say people move through space, it means how do you experience light and shade? How do you experience this whole idea of what is covered, what is built, what is unbuilt? And this whole idea of the pradakshina or moving through a temple is this whole experience of moving through these kind of spaces where you're continuously joggling or toggling between sometimes an open space, sometimes a shaded area, sometimes a closed space, sometimes a smaller volume, a larger volume, a squeezed volume. So this pathway which takes you on a journey across a piece of architecture was something which always intrigued him and always, how do you say, held his imagination for a long period of time, which you will see in all his works. So this is one central, like 5 points of Corbusier. These two ideas of Corb, the idea of the ritualistic pathway which came from his studies of Indian architecture. Now you look at all his other projects. This is Siddharth Goa, which is a hotel which he did in Goa, which has this idea of the street, like in a Mediterranean town, where you have the street, you find bars and pubs and taverns on either side, shop houses and all that. And that street always terminates into the sea, because somewhere the sea is framed as a view, somewhere in the background. And the path always leads you back to the sea. So this path travels along the parallel to the sea at different levels, but everywhere you frame views of the sea, and the path then takes you to the sea through this kind of a hide and seek kind of game, where sometimes you see the sea and sometimes you don't see it. And suddenly you see it and then you walk towards that particular passage. So whether it's Siddharth or whether it's the British Council headquarters in Delhi, where he explores the path and plan, where you see that access passing through an open garden in the front, passes through the building, exposes you to something, then takes you through a veranda, brings you to an internal court, again passes through that pergola area, and then finally the final fixture at the end there. So he explores this idea of the path which passes through these various experiences that one goes through in all his buildings. So whether it's British Council or whether you take Bharat Bhavan as an example, an early cultural center of his, where the path takes you sometimes down along the slope of the ground or sometimes diverts and takes you on to the roofs. And from both directions, you end up landing in the lake. Whether you take the path which takes you down or whether you take the path which takes you on the top, you always come back and experience the lake from there. And that path is a series of experiences through courtyards and open spaces, which then diverts you sometimes to staircases which take you up, or staircase steps which sometimes take you down, but you still don't miss the idea of the path. Or Kala Academy, for example, in Goa, again a cultural center, but here the path takes you from the road to the river. There's a road from which you access Kala Academy. I don't know how many of you have seen the building, but those of you have. As you walk in, there's a fantastic shaded space there, but that shaded space takes you through a series of colonnaded spaces there, which takes you to a canteen behind and then finally back to the river there. So this whole idea of how do you drag people from an outside space to an inside space without even having felt the building, in the sense that you have passed through a building and you're already out, but you don't even realize it. And in the process, you have experienced the building in a very light, or how do you say, in a very simple manner, without even, how do you say, not having to have open doors, not having to have had cross passages, none of the standard, how do you say, features one would think experience in a building. You just walk down, you don't know when you entered the building, you also don't know when you walked out of the building. The experience is so casual and so easy, and that is the whole idea of the path. It is not controlled. It is not something which is locked under key. It is something left as an experience for anybody who walks in. The second key idea in Korea's buildings is what he calls the blessings of the sky. And to him, it is this idea of the open to sky space. And this comes again from his understanding of tropical India, of the climate and of the region. So I would still call him one of our first regionalist architects. When Frampton wrote Critical Regionalism, I think Korea had already done that even before the article came, I guess. In that sense, he was the true regionalist in this, because he understood what this country needed, because he started practice in this country when the country was born. 1947, when the country was born, Korea was there, had just finished his degree in MIT and come back to India. Cobb was building Chandigarh. And these guys had just come back from their studies abroad to come and start building a new country. So they were the founder fathers in that sense to have set the base for what would happen in this country from then on. Hence, these experiences, or what one would call as these observations, are so important in shaping the architecture that a person goes through. And for him, this idea of open to sky is so critical to all his work, basically because he believed that in a country like ours, a third world country where resources are limited, The open to sky space allows so much in terms of what you can do with it. You don't have to build all the time. You just have to kind of enclose an open to sky space, and you could do so many activities out there, which probably you don't require a room to do it. So if I were to take, let's say, Belapur housing that he did in New Bombay, then the idea of incremental housing where you could keep adding rooms as your requirements grew. But the idea was that these houses would be always grouped around a court, where the houses, because they were small, a lot of the activities of the houses would spill onto the courtyards, which is how traditionally we would live in our villages and towns. And that open to sky space adds to the quality of living of all these people without having actually built anything. So this key theme of what one would call, how does one respect this idea of the sun, which is why he calls it blessings of the sky. That it allows us so much that one can do in our country, which a built space cannot do. And if you now trace that through all his projects, you will find that the open to sky space is the key. No project of his works without the idea of an open to sky space, whether it's the Kund in the middle at Jawahar Kala Kendra in Jaipur Museum, which becomes the center where every time you get bored in any of the 9 planets which hold the other museum activities, you can always come back and spend some time in the open space and chill. And then go back and see one more piece of, or one more hall if required. Or whether it is Bharat Bhavan, which you already talked about before, the idea of traveling through the road, coming down to these courtyards, and then the courtyards then allowing you to experience either the terraces or the halls which are adjoining the courtyards. So one thing which one can, appreciate, or let's say when you look at Kanchenjunga as an example of an apartment building, where for the first time, I guess somebody tried to look at this idea of how do you give a piece of sky to an apartment holder. And then the whole section and the whole building and the whole conceptualization of that building works on this idea of how do you give each person a piece of the sky. And that becomes the key, or that becomes the key idea which then drives a project like that. Next, I'll come to since I'm on the Korea trail, if you want to call it that, the next set of things that I would call are now concepts related to the project itself. So we talked about a manifesto, which was the modernist manifesto. Then we talked about Korea and his main themes. In this case, there are 2 main themes, the idea of the open to sky space and the idea of the ritualistic path. And these 2 main themes, you can track them and trace them through all his projects from beginning to end. And they are unconsciously there all the time. Now from there, let's look at projects per se. If I take a particular project, now this is important for students because sometimes when you're in juries and when you're listening to students explaining design, you always come across people who say, the concept of my design is this lotus flower, sir. And from this lotus flower, then this happened and that happened and whatever emerged out of that lotus flower. But one needs to understand, and which is why I bring this particular topic here, is basically because at the end, it is the program of that building which has to work, irrespective of whatever big philosophy I have. I may have the idea of the open to sky space or the ritualistic path or the 5 points of architecture, all that aside. When I'm addressing the program of a particular building, I can't run away from it. It has to first satisfy that programmatic quality 100%. So if I take Belapur housing as a housing project, even today people quote Belapur for what one could do with incremental housing. How do you give people a piece of land and allow them to own it without you actually building for them? And giving them the flexibility and giving them the possibility of building it the way they would want to, which is the biggest challenge in housing. Because most of the time you end up doing it all for them. There is nothing left for them to own them. And here is an example where you are giving them a piece of land with a few services which have been designed, and the rest is left for the owners to decide what they want to build, depending on when they will have the money to build. So what have you actually designed? You have designed a community by the layout in the way it is formed in terms of the open spaces that have been left there. You have designed the community, you have not actually designed the house. And I think that is the biggest challenge of any housing project. We design houses, we don't design communities. We ask for the best apartment plan, we ask for the best unit plan, we ask for the best 2 BHK, 3 BHK, 4 BHK plans. We don't ask for communities. And here is a guy who actually designed the community first and he said, you go build your house yourself. I'm not designing the house for you. That, I think, is the biggest thing that a housing project can do. And that is what Belapur does. Let's look at Gandhi Ashram now as a museum. Now I'm taking different typologies of the same architect. One was a housing project. Now this is a museum. I'll do both the museums at the same time. Gandhi Ashram as a museum which started off with the idea of the program. Now since we're talking program, I'll only talk about what that building is meant for. Here it is meant for, how do you say, containing all the artifacts, letters and other things that Gandhi had, not Gandhi had accumulated, followers of Gandhi had accumulated over the years when he passed away. But when the museum was done, it was so fast in the sense that Gandhi had just passed away probably a year or two back in 47 or 48. And the museum happened in 50. So it was just 2 or 3 years within Gandhi passing away. So it was so recent. And people still hadn't gathered all the material that was surrounding, people were still sending from across the world, sometimes from South Africa or London or wherever else. So the material was still not there. So how big a museum to design, you didn't know. How much more material will come, you didn't know. So the whole idea of this open plan, a plan which could grow in any direction. You can attach any number of squares to this in any way and still keep the building complete. So at no point can you say that this building is incomplete or is it complete. So at the stage it is in, you say it is complete or incomplete, it really doesn't matter. So that as a conceptual idea, saying that it has the looseness to accommodate more, one possibility as a program, as the program of a museum. I'll also talk parallelly with the other one, which is the Jaipur Museum, which had this idea of the 9 squares of the city of Jaipur as its master plan. And he used the master plan to implant the idea of his museum on that. But what magic it does, since I'm talking on both of them at the same time, the problem with museums most of the time is all of us have seen museums, they're the most boring spaces. Because there are halls and halls and halls and halls, and there are objects and objects and objects continuously that you have to continuously see. And once you have bought a ticket, you can't get out if you've seen everything. So you will also not get out. But there is so much of boredom attached to the amount of artifacts that you see. And I talk from personal experience because a few 10 years back, I'd gone to Rome. And you were seeing Michelangelo and Da Vinci and people like that in museums. And after some time, you say, enough. I don't want to see any more Michelangelo and Da Vinci. Because there is so much fatigue that comes in after some time of seeing so many objects at the same time. What he does is basically takes that fatigue away in both these buildings. He allows you to experience one portion of the building at a time, and then he sets you free. For example, if you look at the plan in Gandhi Ashram, the shaded areas are the areas where the exhibits are, and the rest of it is just pathways and open spaces. So you've seen one hall or 2 halls, you can come back and sit on a bench looking at the water. Or on another bench which goes and sees Sabarmati river on the other side. There is no force here by circulation to say that you have to do this in a certain sequence. You can do it at your own leisure. You can do it at your own pace. Nobody is forcing you to see it in a certain manner, in a certain time frame. It also doesn't force you to see everything. You saw 2 of them, you'll come back and see the next 2 sometime later. Doesn't matter. That is the magic of understanding what museum spaces are, or understanding how circulation is so important in a museum space, and the idea of a break, the idea that you need a pause when you're in a museum. Now that is what a program should address when it is a museum, and that he addresses. So that is a local concept or a local idea attached to the program of the museum. How do you make a great museum? And you can't, as an architect, can't run away from that responsibility there, because that is your job. That is why a client has given you the job. He's not worried about your open to sky and ritualistic pathways. He is worried whether his building will function or not. And that is your responsibility. So a local concept or a local idea for a particular program is equally important. And and why it is important is because, which is again for the students, that central idea has to address the idea of the program. What is this building all about? I can't run away with an idea which has got something else altogether. That idea has to address the idea of the program. If it's about a museum, the central idea has to be about the museum. How do I make a great museum? How do I make a great housing project? How do I make a great cultural center? Kala Academy in Goa today stands as probably one of the few buildings in Goa where anything happens. There are movies being screened there. There are youth festivals which happen there, to the extent that when the last chief minister passed away, his body was kept. It is such a popular building and adopted by the city in such a manner that it has become the soul of the city. Any and every activity in the city happens in Kala Academy. Why? Because that space allows it to happen and it doesn't impose itself on the people, because that is what a cultural center is all about. It's a place for the people. It's not a landmark building shouting to say, here I am, please see me. It is a building, when you say it's a place for the people, I mean, that is what a cultural center should do. It should be a place where people come and meet, come and do all kinds of things. Meet for entertainment, meet for recreation, meet for all the activities that people do in a public space. And that is a great public space. The buildings don't impose, the buildings kind of vanish, it just becomes that public space. That is its job. That is what that building was supposed to do. Or for the next example, a tower like Kanchenjunga, where even today, after all these years, after 40 or 50 years since this building was built, we were in college when this building was being built, if I'm not wrong, late 70s, early 80s, sir, if I'm not wrong. Right? We had just joined college then. It was the tallest apartment building in the country. The most expensive apartments on a real estate piece in the country at that point of time, and the most complex section that one could think of to achieve what he wanted to achieve. Of that, only one central idea saying apartments in India can do more than just be apartments. They can actually be villas in the sky. They can actually capture a piece of the sky for every occupant. Now that is a concept for an apartment building, which nobody had even dreamt of until then. Not that this section hasn't been done before. Corbusier has done it before, a lot of other architects have tried it before, but very few as successfully as he managed to do it. So that makes it, even today, one of the best apartment buildings, even by today's standards. Nobody's attempted this even now. With the real estate prices going the way they are, nobody will even attempt it in the future. So that's a different story. But the idea that somebody could make an apartment building like that at that point of time, and why I bring this idea of the programs of this particular architect and the various types that he's managed to do, is basically because you pick any typology of building which Korea has done over the last 50, 60 years. Even today, students, if you open any thesis project in any school, 1 out of 5 you will find a case study of a Korea building. Reasons being, some of these building types have still not been equaled, even after 40 years. You still have to get a great museum like that. You still have to get a great apartment like that. You still have to get a great housing project like that, which has done better than this. Now, I'm not glorifying him in that sense, but I'm explaining it to the students, saying that as architects, it's our responsibility that when you deal with the program, your concepts for the program are equally important. You may have other concepts, you may have other ideas which you're dealing with, but the idea which makes that project what it is to address the nature of the program itself and not digress. Now, when you say digress, I'll give you examples. For example, like I said in the movie Three Idiots, there is a central idea and there are these sub-stories or short stories, or these subtext, if you want to call it, the thing which supports the main idea. There is this idea of the principal, who is a typical principal in any engineering college, who says, you have to study like this will happen and that will happen. So he's a character, a subtext by himself. Or there are his two friends, one who is studying because his parents want him to be an engineer, the other who is studying because he has to be successful in life, but he's scared whether he'll actually be successful or not. So he uses these standard types of people who study, and he uses them as subtexts, or how do you say, as supports for the main story. The main story is about this guy who is passionate, but to explain that he is passionate, I have to bring in all the other people also. No? I have to show you comparison. I have to show how somebody else is studying. Only then you will understand why his studying is different. So you bring in the subtext, you bring in all the other characters in the movie to help support this main character. Now here, when I say subtext, one of the subtexts is climatic response. Now, as an architect, you have your main concept for your program. You have started off with this idea of a museum or of an apartment or whatever else that you're doing, but I need to support it. I just can't have one idea running the whole show. What is my climatic response in a coastal climate like Bombay, when I'm doing this idea of an open to sky space? How does the breeze then flow across the apartment if it is not an air conditioned space? How do I capture the breeze from one face and throw it out the other face so that the entire apartment is ventilated in a coastal climate, because in a coastal climate, air is the key. You have to have air or breeze over your body. So how do I do that? So if you look at that section there on top, or you look at this large section there, those double-height spaces become like scoops. They suck the air into the apartment and then throw it out through the narrower passage on the other side. Sometimes this way, sometimes that way. Now that is his climatic response to a larger idea. Similarly, if you take a Gandhi ashram, the climatic response here, because it's a hot and dry area, it's next to the Sabarmati river, the luvers do the job of controlling the breeze. Which time of the year, which time of the day, how much air do you need in the museum space? The louvre is like a wall which breathes. It's not a window. It's a wall which actually breathes. It's replacing a wall. But then it's a wall which is perforated, which sometimes closes all together or opens halfway through and does all the magic. Or if you take the Bay Island Hotel in, let's say, Andaman, where you have these large balconies and open spaces which are all under a canopy. Because in a coastal climate, you need a chhatri. You don't need anything else. And if you look at the section, that's all it is. All he's given is an umbrella. And everything else is under the umbrella. And you don't need walls there. You don't need anything else there. Everything else is free. You just need that umbrella over your head. Now, as long as you understand that, that is what you need to do on the coast, you've cracked it. But that is a climatic response. That is still not the main concept. That is one of the sidekicks that I require, the comedian or the villain or whoever else in the movie who has to support the story. Required, because that movie doesn't complete without that. The second sidekick or the second story, which is also equally important, is structure and materiality. When I have a great idea, I should also know how to build it. And that is a side story, it's not the main story. So as students, you also need to realize which are your support characters in your story. And how much is their responsibility to build the main story. So if I take a idea of structure and material, Kanchenjunga as an apartment could not have been built unless it was all concrete. It was a 32, 33 story building with a very complex section. So a frame structure could not be done. No other way of doing it other than the entire building being exposed concrete. So he takes this call and goes and does a building entirely in concrete. Or he does a building entirely in stone when he does Bharat Bhavan. Or he does laterite when he does Kala Academy. Or he does all wood when he does Bay Island Hotel. Now, every time the project demands a certain way of building, depending on local conditions, depending on climatic conditions or whatever it is, you're smart enough to address that. And those are how do you, like I said, they are key ideas which are essential, without which you cannot support or how do you say, subscribe to your big idea. Your big idea works because your small ideas are supporting it. And these are all like that. You may have another 10 small ideas. I've just picked two or three because of shortage of time. So that's Bay Island Hotel. Now I'll just take one project and explain that through all these lenses. My favorite one, Gandhi Ashram. And to me, there are these quotes of Gandhi which are there in the ashram all over the place. And to me, I don't know if Korea actually believed this or not. To me, this is the concept of the building. And what does it say? It is one of Gandhi's quotes. I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible. But I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. Korea doesn't say this is the concept of his building. I would like to believe that this is the concept. Because nothing justifies that building as much as what these sentences say, because that is the original Gandhi ashram in the same compound where Gandhi used to live, from which he takes his inspiration. Now, at program level, great museum, we talked about it, but all the other major concept is also the idea of who are you building it for? I mean, this is in commemoration or in memory of somebody like Gandhi. So you pick up keywords from his way of life, his entire body of work, ideas of simplicity, ideas of honesty, ideas of all those ideas, and you put them out in an architecture which complements those ideas. The idea of simplicity, the idea of being honest to what you're doing, the idea of absolute, how do you say, doing the most with what you've got. So if you look at the structure of, if you look at the section, it doesn't try to do or try to become something it shouldn't be. It keeps it at a very simple, very easy, very understandable level, and not that he didn't know how to do anything great than this. He could have, but he played it down because this was a man for whom showing off or doing more than that was not required. This much is enough for him. The man is simple, he is honest, he hardly wears anything. And for somebody like that, what would you want to do which is more than that? So that becomes the local concept for that particular project, which is to do with the person and the cues that you take from the person. You convert that to the ideas of what a museum should be, from your own ideas of what a museum should be in terms of spaces which are loose, which allow you to sit, reflect, think about what you've seen, take pauses in between what you're seeing, does a great museum space also at the same time. And to me, that is the whole idea of the living wall, which talks about allowing the culture of people from all over the world. But I will not be blown off my feet, which means that I will stay rooted to where I'm coming from, to the culture I'm sitting in. But that doesn't mean I'm not seeing what is happening around. I'm open to listening to and seeing what is happening. That reflects in the choice of materials, it reflects in the choice of structure, it reflects in the language of the building itself. In terms of how do you put all these ideas together on such a simple platform where all these ideas are ready. And that to me is the Korea story. In terms of how one can translate sometimes these very large ideas which you have and break them down to smaller and smaller components to every project that you do. What is the idea at the level of the program? What is the idea at the level of structure? What is the idea at the level of a material? How do I address a particular person or a client or whatever else it is? And have these large ideas also at the same time. So you pick a book of Korea and run through all of the projects, you'll find these two ideas which I talked about in the beginning, you'll find them in all his projects. The idea of the open to sky space and the idea of the path. Now that defines my body of work. But I have local concepts for every program that I'm attempting. And within that local program, I also have ideas for how to address that program through all the support ideas that I have, the smaller ideas that I need, ideas of structure and ideas of all that. With that, I come to what I call my universal ideas sometimes. These are ideas or themes that one has seen. So like I said, you could trace this story of what I brought down from the Modernist Manifesto to Korea's philosophy of his entire body of work to concepts for his individual buildings. If I take that, I can apply it to any movement or any architect. I can trace anybody. I can take a Zaha Hadid and go back to deconstruction, to understanding what the larger themes of deconstruction are, and then look at Hadid's work in terms of what she talks about her work, and then look at concepts for individual projects. You will find this method of doing what they do quite standard in terms of how you could read an architect's work. What I'm getting into now is there is a huge body of work out there which has happened over centuries, but whom we can't, how do you say, credit it to any particular architect. Now, which I would like to call as a universal concept. Concepts which have driven the universe or have driven a certain kind of building type across centuries, but you can't credit anybody specific for having derived this concept. Let's take the concept of a temple, for example. Not the temple per se, but the concept of a temple. What is the concept of a temple? Now, this is something which all of us go through when we do our prayers or when we go and visit a temple. But do we really think in that manner when that experience happens? For example, from the street, you walk into a temple normally through a gateway like this. This is an old temple, but even in a relatively newer temple, there is a compound and there's a gate. So you walk through the gate and enter the temple. What do you do next? There is a shrine and there is a colonnade all around, and then you normally end up walking around the shrine, which you call the pradakshina. But before you do the pradakshina, what do? You remove your slippers. Correct? You remove your slippers at one point near the gateway, and then you start doing your pradakshina of what you 8 times, 10 times. People decide how many rounds you need to do around the temple. So you see the precinct of the temple on the side there, where you see the corridors on the side. So basically, you are into a space now which is detached from the outside world. You walk through a gateway, and you're transported into a world which has got nothing to do with the outside. Right? We'll come to the explanation later. What do you do next? You climb up the steps and you ring a bell. Correct? You walk further inside, and the priest gives you the prasada. Right? So you have your tirtha there. And in the where the prayer is happening, you have incense sticks, and you have incense, and you have all that happening there. And finally, you get to see the idol right at the end of the temple. Correct? This is typically what happens in every temple, whether you're in the north of India, south of India, on the coast, or in the desert, anywhere. Now let's understand what is the story behind this. And why is this, as long as the story doesn't change, why is it that the architecture doesn't change? And and to figure out the story, let's say you removed your slippers and you started doing your pradakshina. What exactly happened then? What exactly happened then is your sense of touch was triggered. Your feet touched the ground because you removed your slippers. So when your feet touched the ground, your sense of touch was triggered. Next, you rang the bell. You heard something. Your sense of hearing was triggered. You had the tirtha. Your sense of taste was triggered. You smelled the incense. Your sense of smell was triggered. And you went to the darkest corner of the temple. Any temple, when you walk to the Garbhagriha, are you walking towards the light or are you walking towards darkness? Do you walk towards darkness or do you walk towards light? This is a photograph looking ulta from the Garbhagriha, looking out towards the outside. But when you're walking in, you're actually walking to the darkest corner of the temple. Why? Because by the time you reach there, your eyes or the pupils in your eyes have dilated fully. Because you're in a dark space, your eyes are fully dilated. So this experience of 10 minutes of having walked out from the gateway, they've done the pradakshina. Why is the pradakshina? The pradakshina is basically a walk under the sky. If you go and see that photograph, and this is common to every temple that you do, it is never a covered space. It is a walk under the sky. It is a space between two things under which you walk. And the object of the pradakshina is that you are taking time to drop all the thoughts that you came in when you came off the road. When you walked off the road, there was something running in your head, no? Worries, tensions, anxieties, this, that, whatever. You do the pradakshina 10 times, 20 times or whatever. The idea is that it is supposed to calm you down. It is supposed to prepare you for the act of meeting God. You take that time, go round and round till your mind is calm enough to go and have that conversation with God. And in order to have that conversation, all your senses have to be fully aware. Your body and your senses are fully aware in a state of mind where that conversation is now possible. Your sight, your touch, your smell, your hearing, your eyes. In the process, also look at what else happens. When I touch the feet to the ground, there is also the connect with earth. When I sip the tirtha, there is connect with water. When I walk under the sky, there is this connect to space. So in these 5 acts that you do of exciting, or I would say energizing your senses, you are also connecting to the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, space, right? Now that is the story of a temple. Now, where did it come from? How many centuries it took for people to get this right is a different story. Now you go and see what is the plan and section of a temple. This will not change. You go to any part of the country. You have the precinct, you have the door through which you walk in. There is a compound. The compound is supposed to separate you from where you are coming from. The open to sky path which goes around the main shrine. Then you come back and enter and you start walking slowly or whatever to the darkest part of the temple, which you see there in section. It is the smallest in volume and the darkest. Now, this is also important because there is another story which is connected to this. The story of prayer in Hinduism, or this path of self-realization, if you want to call it in Hinduism, is an individual journey. It is not a collective journey. Unlike Christianity and Islam, we all go and pray at the church at the same time on a Sunday. In Islam, we all go and pray 5 times in the mosque at the same time, all of us together. It's a collective prayer. Whereas here, it is an individual's prayer. It is not a collective. We are not going there in hundreds and praying in the temple. Even if you're going as a family, we go one behind the other, not 5 together. So it is an individual's conversation with God. Now you look at your section and look at the plan and try and understand, does this arrangement change anywhere in the country? You may have slope roofs in coastal areas, you may have some other Gopura or Mantapa in Bhubaneswar or Calcutta, where it is all done in brick, for example, because brick is the local material there. Such stories will change. Materiality will change. Structure will change. Size will change sometimes. Larger temples, smaller temples, Madurai and more complex temples. But the narrative or the story does not change. And as long as the narrative does not change, the layout and the section also will not change. So the point is, the architecture here is supporting a story or a concept which is being handed down from generation to generation from God knows when. But it has shaped our environment, it has shaped our public buildings or our temples for centuries now. Now let's take one more example. The example of Christianity. 2000 years, religion which came up during the Roman times was suppressed as a religion during the Roman times. Hence, if you look at those pictures, it was always practiced down in the caves and in areas where people would not see where these people were, who were practicing Christianity. So it was always in dingy and those kind of spaces, because otherwise you would be persecuted. I mean, the stories of Nero, there's an old saying, when Rome was burning, Nero was fiddling, and he was on his violin or whatever it is. And there are stories of, he used to burn Christians as torches in his garden to light up. So, I mean, there are all kinds of vague stories of the persecution that the Christians went through under the Roman period. Now, the other part of the story also is that Christianity also talks about this thing about heaven and earth. And you do good deeds, you go to heaven. You do bad deeds, you go down to hell. You go up to heaven, you go down to hell. Now, this business of up and down is so important here because the skies represented heaven. So when you look up at the sky is a dome, which represented the heavens. And that becomes the key theme for 200 or 300, sorry, more than 500, 600 years of church architecture. The whole idea of how do I represent this idea of heaven in a built form. So if you look at the early Christian churches, this is Romanesque, early Christian period. The idea was of span. How do I make this large span? Why? Because once these people came out from their basements and Rome became Christian. The last Roman emperor became Christian. That is the reason why Europe is Christian today. Because the Romans had captured most of Europe. And because Rome had such extensive reach as a nation or as an empire, the minute Rome became Christian, for the rest of the empire to become Christian didn't take long. Because it passed through the same routes, the way how Rome had spread itself, it spread Christianity next. But now once the people came out of their suffering or out of their whatever bondage, they had to celebrate this act of a new religion. And how do you gather in large numbers under spaces which could accommodate such large numbers? So the first key idea was the idea of span. How do I make this large space? which can accommodate so many people. And all early Christian churches were all about this idea of creating this great span under which so many people could gather and pray. So you see the vaulted roof, you see. So the interesting part that you need to note there is, look at the outer wall and the number of openings, or what happens on the outer wall. Minuscule openings, thick walls. Why? Because the load finally comes down there. So if you understand structure, if you understand building construction, you'll understand that when you do a vaulted structure, the weight comes down. It has to be brought down by these thick walls, and I can't puncture those thick walls because they're carrying weight of the roof. So that is where this story starts off, with the idea of the span of how do I create the heavens by creating a large space under which I'm praying. The next story starts, how do I make that space now light? How do I bring light into that sky? And that is where Gothic comes in. Because by the time Gothic architecture came, it took a few hundred years. But when it came, some smart guy figured out that you don't have to do a vault always like that. Somebody figured out you could do a pointed arch and do vaults which crisscross. So you created the cross vault. And the minute you created the cross vault, which you're seeing in the photograph there, the weight starts going to the corners. So I need 4 columns with a cross vault, then I don't need the wall. And it took a few hundred years for somebody to figure out that I don't need a wall now, because the weight is now going to the columns. And once the wall vanished, I could bring in light. And we talk about Gothic for rose windows and stained glass and all that comes later. The idea that somebody asks this basic question, how do I bring in light? Because you had these massive cavernous spaces on top, which were all dark, pitch dark. One guy, this was during early Gothic, one of the French priests, in fact, who wanted to build a new church, and he said, I will not allow anybody to build it unless he can show me the way to bring in light into this space. And that is the key to most architecture. Need is extremely important. Like the first case, need there was span. How do I house so many people under such a space? The next question somebody asked was, how do I bring in light? And once light came into that space transformed. Now look at the plans become that much more lighter. Where did the walls go? Now you have only 4 points, you only have the columns. All the peripheral walls vanished. Because suddenly the space was now lit, and you could look up and you could look at the sky which had light coming in from it, which then takes you to the next phase. Then you have of course your rose windows and all that, but then this is the subtext, which is what I'm saying. The key idea was, or the key concept was, how do I create a space under the heavens? That is the key idea. Key idea number 2, how do I light those heavens? Subsidiary ideas, I will figure out a way to build which will allow me to do that. So you figure out building construction techniques, you figure out structural ideas which will allow you to then bring in light. So these are subtexts, these are the short stories. Then comes our hero, Michelangelo, Renaissance time, who creates this massive dome on St. Peter's and makes it rest on a band of light. Where actually you think the maximum load of that dome would go, that is where he brings in light. So that entire dome, I mean, when you're actually standing there, I had the good fortune of being in that space. When you're actually standing there, you can't imagine the sheer size of that damn thing. It's so huge. And when you look up, it is actually floating on a band of light. So this is the maximum that one can come close, which is this obsession with these domical spaces, which are large, whether it's Hagia Sophia or Renaissance, or basically, what are you trying to do? You're trying to create those heavens. You're trying to create that sky up there, which is where my God sits. And that is my concept, or that has been a narrative for so many centuries. Who started it, where it came from, nobody knows. But it created an entire set of architecture for a few hundred years, which didn't change. It changed now after the Industrial Revolution, when we put our first man on the moon and somebody realized God is not there anymore. So we stopped looking at the skies. So the minute the narrative changed, the plan of the church changed. Now you find other reasons to build your churches in different ways. But till then, this was the only reason. Till then, this was the only reason why a particular narrative worked, whether that of a temple or whether that of a church. And that is extremely important or extremely crucial, because without these narratives or without these key themes, you wouldn't have had this body of work. You wouldn't have had these architects. You wouldn't have had these movements. You wouldn't have had these great buildings which sit as our history today. In all parts of the world, whether it's temples here or churches somewhere else, or mosques in some other part of the world. All of them strive on this one thing called the narrative, which then decides how the architecture then supports it. It is not because Michelangelo wanted to make a big dome just because he wanted to make a big dome. There is this narrative or this story which is running at the back. And that story is so powerful that architect after architect, years later, even after a few hundred years, doesn't stray from that. For example, I had put that photograph, but I removed it. If you look at Cobb's Ronsham, I don't know how many of you have seen the photographs of Ronsham. Finally, even Ronsham doesn't go away from the fact that it is about the roof. And it is about the light coming in from top. So there also, even a modernist can't escape the narrative. He can't escape from that old idea that it is finally about that roof, and it is finally about the light which comes down below that roof and makes that roof kind of fly there up in the sky. So powerful narrative. So which is why I wanted to end it with this particular slide, saying that when you talk about concepts or you talk about ideas, there are so many layers to it. But as a student, you need to understand which layer operates where, which is an idea which is way up there, which is an idea which is at the level of, this is what I believe, this is what I'm good at, and I would want to do this for the rest of my life, which is an idea which operates at that level, which is an idea which operates that I have a project now, and for this project, I need to do the best. This idea operates at the level of the project. And then there are ideas which will then support you to make those projects viable. Be it structure, be it response to climate, be it materiality, be it whatever. There may be 10 other or 20 other things which will help support the main story required. And you have to put your mind as much to that as much as you're putting to the rest of it. Thank you. I hope it was a worthwhile talk.
Thank you so much for this that address, sir. Any questions? Students can post it on the Q&A box. Architect Prashant Nandi Prasad will ask here. And also, what a wonderful journey, right? Right from manifesto of Corbusier, various themes of Charles Correa, specific to project concept, villains of climate, side stories of structure, materiality, universal ideas. How do the different questions you ask, the different questions of light, how to put large people together, how these ideas generate so many new ideas. Wow, wonderful. Actually, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even after 25 years of into architecture, this, whatever sir said, is encompassing so many things. And it's so refreshing. Any questions, Prashant? Any questions here also? Yes, please ask the question.
True.
The moment we give them a program, the idea of program immediately in their mind becomes an area. So we then go back and say our program is area that was there. But what is it that you add to the program? But when you are bringing the concepts, project takes a turn there. And then now we then bring the idea of the area. So a lot of students are not able to understand what is the study. Begin with the study. Then the area program, or then the program, and then the area.
True.
So they go to the area and then it has to be something like this program and then there's a.
For that, yeah. And this is typical of the early years. That is the first.
Sir, if I may interrupt you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sir, for those who are watching the event online, we couldn't hear the question. Which,
No, I'll repeat the question.
yeah, if you
before
could
I
do
answer.
that and do that, it'll be helpful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
the question asked is for the younger younger years 1 and 2 and things like that. How do you make students aware of what is this idea of a narrative or the idea of a key idea because students normally get into the idea of an area requirement and starting to design straight away from there and and don't know then where to bring in the narrative. So the question there is how do you teach them to start with this idea of a narrative? Okay, since I have been teaching first and second year for a long time now, I call it the approach using the horse blinders, right? I mean, so you have this on a horse carriage. Normally, the horse has these blinders, which forces the horse to look only in a particular direction, right? So in the first 2 years, the idea is to create problems or projects in a manner where the focus of the project itself becomes a direction in which to look for an idea. So you don't leave loose-ended projects. You don't leave projects which have multiple ways of looking at it. You close all the other doors and you show only one door. You say this project is only about this. And when it is, you have decided the direction. And then the students are forced to, look at it only through that lens, through that one window, which shows them only that view. So your ideas then come only from that direction. It don't come in from all that. For example, one simple example I'd give. Let's say you're doing an example and let's say we do this standard first year problem in deductive forms, additive forms and stuff like that. You have this cube in which you have to knock something off and create sculptural forms and all that. So I remember doing a problem like that where you had this cube which was composed of so many cubes, 5 into 5, some 25 into 125 cubes over there. The story given to them was create a path for me to climb from the bottom to the top. And show me something interesting on the way and tell me why is this guy climbing from the bottom to the top? Now, that gives them clues in terms of whether it is a religious journey, whether it is an adventure spot, whether it is a fun thing, whether it's a recreate, that looseness they can select. But the task is clear. You have to give me a path from the top to the bottom. And in the process, whatever your story is, create spaces which relate to that story. And you get some amazing results out of that because the task is clear cut. There are only so many cubes. Out of that, I have to remove so many. I have to create a path. So all that is defined. Everybody is doing the same thing. All they're adding individually to that story is why my story is different from yours. And why is my guy climbing it differently? Yours is climbing differently because he's going to commit suicide from there. Whereas this fellow is going to go and find nirvana there. Now you create the path from there and then tell me the other story that supports it. So the idea is to create the sub stories, main story and all that within that small task, but the task has clear focus. I remember third semester in RV sometime, quite a few years back when the syllabus used to be very prescriptive. Third semester, it's about a motel. Fifth semester, it's about a college. Sixth semester, it's about this. So third semester, I think it was some motel or something like that. Now, all of us know motel is something on the highway next to a petrol bunk or whatever, where you do a night stopover and you go on. What story can you build in something like that? I mean, it's just a requirement. There are 4 or 5 rooms and some toilets and some place for people to park their cars. Now, to add a twist to that, I said, this is a motel next to Sri Ravi Shankar's ashram. And the other motel is next to Vijay Mallya's F1 track. Now you build. Now there is a possibility that you pick up a story because it is next to Sri Ravi Shankar on the same road, next to Mr. Sri Ravi Shankar's ashram. Now, who are the people who are coming there now? You'll think. Now, what bent of mind will they have? That you will think. How will they spend their time there? That you will think. What is the purpose they have come there for? That you will think. So slowly you're creating a narrative for the people who are coming there, what they will do in that time, 1 night or 2 nights that they stay there. They are probably going to the ashram there, whatever. So you'll create an entire 24-hour agenda for them. And for that, then you will design. So the point is that you have to create those blinders or those blinkers for every project And like I say, it is also like the example of, I always quote this example of an onion peel. An onion, when you cut it in cross section, it has so many layers, correct? Now from first year to final year as you're going, how many layers more are you addressing every year? So in other words, how much is this blinder going to keep opening every year? How many more things can the student grasp? This year or first year, I'm giving you 2 layers of this onion to peel. Anthropometry, understanding your own body and measurements and space, doing a space for probably 2 people to occupy or something, enough. But do it right. So probably I've peeled 1 layer here. Next semester I go, probably it becomes a family. 5 people occupying a space, another 5 people, and they have some common space in between. Now what do they do? How do they live in that space? 1 more layer peeled. So every semester that I keep going further and further, how many more layers am I willing to peel? So by the time I come to the thesis, I have that onion fully open. All the layers kind of attacked. I know structure, I know climate, I know this, I know that. But then are we preparing them in that order? Where every semester you're exposing them to a new complexity, but they should have mastered the earlier complexity. Our problem is we tend to set very complex problems right from beginning and hope that the students will crack them. But then the students are students. So the point is you have to keep it simple enough so that it is how do you say, it is exciting to crack it. It is not challenging to crack it. It's not that it's like a maths problem. I got it right now, I'm happy about it. It's not that. I should have enjoyed the process of having done it. Whether I got it right or not is not important. I thoroughly loved doing it. That's enough. Yeah. Next.
So there's a question online.
Yeah.
One Mr. Mahidar, he's saying, is abstracting the concept creating a perfect design, or keeping it clear makes it perfect?
Well, like I said, there are a lot of concepts out there which operate at so many levels, right? Concepts which relate to specific programs and the buildability of a specific program have to be specific. Now that there I can't be abstract. I can have an abstract concept at a much larger level, which defines probably my body of work, or which defines the way I read, the way I think, the way I, the movies I see, the music I listen to. I could have so many ways of abstracting ideas from all that, which is kind of feeding my abstract way of thinking. But when I'm bringing it down on paper to address a particular project or a particular client or a particular way of building something, I have to be specific. I can't be in the abstract then, which was what the talk was about. I mean, you have Korea's abstract ideas of the open to sky space and the ritualistic path. Now that he's not talking to his clients. He's not explaining it to them that these are my great ideas, so I'm putting it in your project. He's not going to talk about that there. That is for him and for, let's say, the architects whom he's talking to. For the client, it is what is the program? You have an apartment building. How many apartments can I fit in that? What great stuff am I doing for your apartment? That I will talk about there. And that is specific.
Thank you. There's one more question, which is probably a continuation of what you've been just telling.
Yeah.
From Mr. Kushal Jaiprakash. He says, how different is an idea or a concept from interpretation? Are concepts to a certain level just interpretations? What is your take on this? For example, can we interpret Three Idiots movie as a storytelling experiment at different levels? Or it might also be really at the director's take. So does that mean concepts are just his reinforcements of storytelling?
No, concepts are personal, definitely. Like I said, the abstract, for example, this idea of you need to be passionate about what you do in life and the rest will automatically follow. Maybe the director's take, right? I mean, that is probably what has worked for him in his life. But I can't make a movie out of that. If I have to if I have to explain that idea to somebody, and if that is my reason for saying something, then I'll probably conduct a seminar kind of thing with people who come and tell you how to manage your life and that kind of a talk and stuff like that, and you could still get the same result. Here I'm making a movie. So when I'm making a movie, my big ideas, even if people didn't understand them, it's okay. The movie is for entertainment. Did people have a great time watching Three Idiots? That is the key. In the process, did they get anything? Great. If they got it, nothing like it. If they didn't, it's still okay. They still had a great time for 3 hours. So that is the beauty of the program, in the sense that you have addressed the program of what a movie format is. A movie format is for entertainment. It's not for education. Nobody goes to movies to get gyan. Right? You go to a movie to get entertained, have fun, have a great time for 3 hours and come out. That the movie should do, which is why I said the program is important. If it is for entertainment, it should entertain first. In the process, if some gyan is coming, great. People who got it. People who didn't get it, it's okay. Doesn't matter. So that is where this whole thing comes in the sense that the director or the architect or the creator or who else may have some great ideas on the side. It's like Picasso's paintings for that example. You go and stand in front of it, probably you don't feel anything what he felt, or probably the guy next to you is feeling. And that is your personal take on it. Now, in the sense where you are coming from will define how you react to a particular piece of art or architecture for that matter.
One more question from Sahana. Is there any such thing as too many concepts? How and when do we know that we are making a narrative too complex?
How and when do you know when you're making a narrative too complex?
Yeah, and is there any such thing as there are too many concepts?
No, there are always too many concepts. You have to figure out which are the ones which are driving the project and which are the ones which are supporting it. Every project has at least 10 concepts running. And I'm sure every architect who in every office grapples with this problem. You have to choose which one is going to drive the project. The rest will have to support it. I may have a structural idea which is fantastic. I may have a window detail which I just want to try. I may have a section which is running in my head for a long time, which I just want to use in some project. I may have a way of looking at technology and materiality which is waiting to be explored in some project. Now, so there are probably 10 things running in my mind at the same time. But a particular project's demands of what drives that particular project, that comes first. The rest of it, you will have to decide how to use them as support mechanisms. So yes, there are multiple concepts running at the same time. You have to classify which ones will drive the project and which ones will support it.
Okay. Do we have time for a few more questions?
Yeah, one or two more.
One or two more. So I think some of the common ones I will skip out for now. Perhaps we'll try and address them individually. But regarding concepts, there is somebody else is saying, how do we stick to different concepts? And as we tend to progress a lot and get a lot of ideas, and sometimes there are time constraints as well. So that is one. And there's one by architect Salim, which I'll take it up probably later.
Okay. That's one. So the one you asked for,
how do we stick to specific concepts as we tend to change over time? Our thinking and narrative might change. How do we stick to that? Because sometimes when you're doing a project, there's also a limit and constraint of time as well. So how do we stick to a concept is what
there is no sequence to this, which is again, I'm sure all architects sitting in the audience as well as elsewhere will know. Sometimes concepts for specific projects don't arrive by speed post on day one, right? So it's not that I opened the first sheet or the courier on the first day when the project started and I've got a concept ready now, let's start. It never happens like that. Sometimes you start the project and along the way, as things progress or ideas flow, you're scribbling, you've done 10 doodles, 20 doodles, thrown it in the trash can, didn't like something, and somewhere along the way, one idea sticks or some idea sticks which you think then you need to pursue. And there is no first and last to it. And sometimes it happens at the beginning, sometimes in the middle, sometimes it could even happen at the end and then you scrap everything that you've done before and start all over. Because what came at the end was probably so powerful that you just want to discard everything else that you've done with. So there is no sequence to this. I mean, one would wish that it was sequential. Unfortunately, it is not. Yeah, there's one more as Salim.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, architect Salim says this is with reference to Charles Correa's Gandhi Ashram project. So there was some recent proposal to read.
There was
a lot of this, and what is your take? He wants to know. Since we referred Charles on your project.
That is a project so dear in so many ways because every time I take students there are two things I show them when I take them to Gandhi Ashram, and from there we normally go on to see Doshi's Institute of Indology. which is just hardly a stone's throw away, I mean, 2 streets or 3 streets away. And there is a plaque in front of Gandhi Ashram in the ground there, just about as you're entering the gate, which says that it was inaugurated by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru on so and so date at so and so time, probably 1948 or 49, if I'm not wrong, on a particular day in August or September, if I'm not wrong. And when you go to Institute of Indology and you see Doshi's building there, there is another plaque there, and you go and read the plaque. It is on the same day, again by Pandit Nehru, with a time difference of about an hour or so. And it gives you the goosebumps that on the same day, somebody like Pandit Nehru probably created the 2 great geniuses which lasted the next 50 years and created the architectural scenario for this country. With these 2 seminal projects, Gandhi Ashram and the Institute of Indology. And why Gandhi Ashram at that level is so important. I mean, I remember talking to Charles Correa just before he passed away. He had come to Bangalore for a event, and we had done a workshop on his LIC building in front of Vidhan Saudha, using it as a public space and saying reclaiming public space and doing something with it. So there are a series of students from all colleges who had participated in the workshop, and we had taken the entries to Korea to show it to him and ask him to judge. So he said, why didn't some students say demolish the building and we'll build something else? Wasn't somebody smart enough to say that? So, and during that time, I remember asking this very same question to him, saying that in all these projects that you've done over the years, are there a few which still kind of hold the same interest or the same excitement that when they were built? And his very prompt reply, even without thinking, he says Gandhi Ashram. So, I mean, that there is so much to it, probably also because one, he had just come back from college, and this was his first project given to him by Achyut Kanvinde. It was a project which had gone to Kanvinde, and Kanvinde, the great man that he is, he would hand out projects to budding architects, saying that, okay, you do this, and this was one of those projects which Kanvinde handed out to Korea, saying that, why don't you give it a shot? And he was not a known architect, he was not famous, he was nothing. So probably because it was all from the heart, and it was all coming so in such a naive and simplistic fashion. And the fact that he was not a known architect then probably was also the reason that it turned out the way it did. So definitely not a building which somebody should even touch for any reason.
Okay, do we have time for more questions, or should we have one last one?
Ramaraju is waving his hands. Okay, one last one.
Okay, I think I will choose this and to kind of, since we are primarily targeting and addressing students today.
Yeah.
So there is one question by Sanket. He says, sir, what was your thesis topic or concept, and which one of the project came across your journey, which you found most interesting?
No, 25, 30 years of practice and 5 years of architecture has a lot of instances like this where you start off with some ideas which really work for you, some ideas which you wished worked for you, and so the list is long. I mean, there are I won't say one or two. There are quite a few jobs which some got built, some didn't get built the way you wanted them to, and some didn't take off at all, but were still great ideas. So I mean that is the greatest thing about being an architect, that this journey will keep going on. There will be newer ideas which will continuously keep coming, and the energy or the excitement of wanting to go to office every day is basically that something is going to kick you somewhere today or tomorrow. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for answering all the questions so patiently. Now I request Chairman of IIA Karnataka Chapter, Architect Mohan Beer, to address the gathering for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Ramaraju. Good evening, fellow architects, academicians, and students of various colleges who are here attending this event, and our esteemed speaker, my dear friend, Prashant. It was really my privilege to be here amongst all of you for the very first event of Education and Academics Committee of IIA Karnataka Chapter, which is a lecture series 1, listening to Prashant. I really feel I should join his college as a student now. It was so good. Prashant, I would like to attend more of these lectures at your college when you are addressing your students. Well, when our new team of IIA Karnataka chapter embarked on the journey for the term 2020 and 22, amongst many other agenda, we wanted to focus on education too. We found there was disconnect between academicians and professionals. And we sincerely wanted to bridge this gap. Along with this, we also wanted to engage students and connect them with professionals of our own as well as other allied professionals. Earlier, I think our team had reached out to all architecture schools of Karnataka to know how IIA can collaborate and contribute in education. We are really so happy to have received inputs from quite a few colleges. We may not be able to address all the requests, but I promise we will try our best, at least to address most of them. I take this opportunity to request our Education and Academics Committee to arrange a day-long physical meet of all the heads of the institution to discuss in detail and finalize for at least next 1 year. Tomorrow, we are kickstarting another program called Development Program. This is in collaboration with BMS School of Architecture. The topic being emerging technologies. It has 10 sessions. This talks from the eminent speakers who are all experts from the industry. This is spread out for almost a week now. We will have one session every day in the evening for the week, except on weekends where we'll have 2 sessions. Many institutions and professionals have registered. If any of you have missed out or yet to register, please do so immediately after the event, because we are probably, I think, today by 12 midnight, we will be closing the registrations. I thank Professor Jagannath, Professor Satyaprakash Varanasi, and the entire team of KS School of Architecture for coming forward to host this event. I also would like to thank all the principals, faculty, and students of various colleges for participating in this event. This is the first time I heard Prashant speaking actually. Wow, you made us understand the design concept in a very simple way, Prashant. And I wonder why and where you were hiding for so long. Yes, set the bars really high. And it is a big task for the committee to look for such speakers. I congratulate entire education committee for unearthing him. Thank you all once again.